Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! The book, an old leather-bound tome, lay splayed across the desk, its pages whispering secrets long unspoken. A hesitant hand ventured forth, delicately caressing the words penned in times now distant.
My dearest journal, a confession holds me captive. It lingers on my lips, yet weighs upon my heart.
Within the quiet room, John's eyes trailed across the intimate words of his cousin. Curiosity had long since ensnared him, its tendrils weaving ever tighter as he pored over the hidden depths of Emily's life. Only here, within these pages, did her true self find release, a self he could scarcely recognize through the veil of her guarded countenance. The house they shared these past weeks reverberated with a unique intimacy. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Diana attended yoga, providing a reliable 90-minute window for Carlos to slip into her room and lose himself in her private world. He justified it as harmless curiosity at first, then as concern for a sister going through a difficult time. Now, 4 weeks in, he could no longer pretend it was anything but a violation. The front door slammed. Carlos froze, heart hammering against his ribs. Diana wasn't due home for another 40 minutes. He snapped the diary shut, slid it back into the drawer where he'd found it, and turned to flee, only to find his sister standing in the doorway, still in her black yoga pants and purple athletic top, arms crossed and eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "What are you doing in my room?" Her voice was deadly quiet. Carlos felt sweat beading along his hairline, his mouth suddenly dry. "I was just looking for the charger you borrowed." The lie sounded pathetic even to his own ears. Diana's gaze drifted to her desk, to the drawer not quite closed, then back to Carlos. Class ended early. Instructor got food poisoning. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded more threatening than a slam. How long? How long what? Don't. She held up a hand. Don't insult me. How long have you been reading my diary? Carlos considered denying it, manufacturing indignation, but something in Diana's expression told him the game was up. He slumped, running a hand through his short brown hair. "About a month," he admitted. "I'm sorry, Di. I know it was wrong." "A month," Diana repeated, her voice flat. She nodded slowly, as if reaching a decision. "Well, that explains how you suddenly knew about my promotion before I mentioned it, and why you asked about Mark when I haven't spoken his name aloud in weeks." Carlos winced. "Look, I made a mistake." "No!" Diana cut him off. "A mistake is accidentally opening the wrong door. What you did was deliberately violate my privacy, repeatedly, for weeks." She moved toward him, and despite being 3 inches shorter, somehow seemed to tower over him. "You know what this means, don't you?" "I'll move out," Carlos offered quickly. "I can find a place this weekend." Diana's lips curled into a smile that sent a chill down his spine.
"Oh no, little brother.
You don't get off that easily." She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "You wanted to know my private thoughts? My feelings? Fine. Let's get really personal." Before Carlos could react, Diana was dragging him across the room to her closet. He could have resisted physically. He had a good 40 pounds on his sister. But guilt rooted him to the spot as she flung open the closet door and began rifling through hangers. "What are you doing?" he asked, confusion replacing fear. Teaching you a lesson about walking in someone else's shoes. Diana pulled out a red dress with white polka dots and held it against Carlos's chest. Perfect. You've always been slim like Dad. Realization dawned slowly, then all at once. Wait, you can't be serious. Dead serious. Diana's eyes flashed. You're going to experience what it feels like to have your identity exposed without consent. Strip. Diana, I'm 30 years old. You can't just strip, or I call Mom and tell her who really broke her antique vase in '09. The one she still thinks the dog knocked over. Carlos stared at his sister, searching for any sign she might be bluffing. Finding none, he sighed and unbuttoned his blue shirt with shaking fingers. 15 minutes later, Carlos stood before Diana's full-length mirror, barely recognizing the person reflected back. The red polka dot dress hugged his narrow frame, ending just above his knees. Diana had bullied him into shaving his legs, threatening blackmail with each protest. She'd styled his brown hair, longer on top than the sides, into 2 ridiculous pigtails secured with red ribbons. His face, usually angular and unremarkable, was transformed with foundation, mascara, and a thick layer of bright pink lipstick that made his lips look twice their normal size. I think Josephine is coming along nicely, Diana remarked, stepping back to admire her handiwork. She circled him, adjusting the dress where it bunched at his waist. You actually have decent legs. Who knew?
This isn't funny,
Carlos muttered, tugging at the dress's hemline. I apologized. I won't do it again. Of course you won't, Diana agreed pleasantly, pulling out her phone. Because now I have insurance. The camera click made Carlos lunge forward. No! Don't you dare take pictures! Too late. Diana danced away, snapping photo after photo as Carlos stumbled after her, unused to the strappy black heels she'd forced onto his feet. Delete those, he demanded, his voice rising in panic. Diana, I swear to God, you're not exactly in a position to make demands, Josephine. Diana flipped through the photos, nodding with satisfaction.
These are actually quite good. You make a surprisingly pretty girl with those high cheekbones.
Carlos sank onto the bed, burying his face in his hands, smearing lipstick across his palms.
What do you want? You've humiliated me. We're even.
Diana sat beside him, her expression softening slightly. We're not even close to even. I kept that diary for 10 years, Carlos. 10 years of my most private thoughts, fears, hopes, and you treated it like your personal entertainment. Guilt twisted in Carlos's stomach. Put that way, his actions seemed even worse. But, Diana continued, I'm willing to call it square on one condition. Anything, Carlos said quickly. Name it. My friend Olivia is having her 30th birthday party this weekend. You'll attend as Josephine. The blood drained from Carlos's face. In public? No way! Absolutely not! Diana shrugged, holding up her phone. Then I guess everyone at your accounting firm gets to see these on Monday. I wonder what Mr. Patterson will think of his junior analyst's extracurricular activities. Carlos closed his eyes, feeling trapped. Your friends will know it's me. Most of them have never met you, Diana countered. The few who have won't recognize you like this. Trust me. This is cruel, even for you. Reading someone's private diary for a month is cruel, Diana corrected. This is justice. Carlos looked at his reflection again, the stranger in the red dress with smeared pink lips and ridiculous pigtails. One evening of humiliation versus professional suicide. It wasn't really a choice.
Fine,
He relented.
one evening. Then we're done, and you delete the photos.
Diana smiled, extending her hand. Deal. And don't worry, I'll make sure you look much better than this for the actual party. This was just to get your attention. Carlos took her hand reluctantly. I really am sorry, Di. I know. She squeezed his hand once before releasing it. Now, let's get you cleaned up. We need to go shopping tomorrow. The following afternoon found Carlos trailing behind Diana through a boutique he'd never have entered on his own. Racks of women's clothing surrounded them, a riot of colors and fabrics that made his head swim. I still don't understand why we need to buy anything, Carlos muttered, glancing nervously around the store. Can't I just wear something of yours? Diana sorted through a rack of summer dresses. We have different body types. Besides, if you're going to do this, you should do it properly. I'm not doing anything, Carlos hissed. I'm being blackmailed. Semantics. Diana pulled out a cream-colored dress with a floral pattern around the hem. This would look good with your coloring. Go try it on. Carlos stared at the garment as if it might bite him. Here? Now? No, next Christmas. Diana rolled her eyes. Yes, now. The fitting rooms are over there. But what if someone sees me? That's why you're wearing that baseball cap and sunglasses. No one will recognize you. Diana shoved the dress into his hands and pointed him toward the fitting rooms. Go. I'll bring you some options in different sizes. In the privacy of the fitting room, Carlos hung the dress on a hook and stared at it. This was insane. He was a grown man, a professional with an MBA, letting his sister strong-arm him into drag because he'd made a mistake. He should walk out right now, take the hit to his reputation, and move on. But as he imagined his coworkers seeing those photos, him in pigtails and bright lipstick, his resolve crumbled. One evening playing dress-up for strangers he'd never see again was a small price to pay for keeping his dignity intact at work. With a resigned sigh, Carlos stripped down to his boxers and reached for the dress. By the time Saturday evening arrived, Carlos had moved beyond mortification into a strange, detached acceptance. Diana had spent hours transforming him, this time with a gentler touch than the initial revenge makeover. She'd helped him into the cream-colored summer dress they'd purchased, which fell just below his knees and had a modest neckline that disguised his flat chest. She'd convinced him to wear a brunette wig with subtle auburn highlights that Diana swore looked natural, styled in loose waves that framed his face. The makeup was tasteful, foundation to smooth his complexion, brown eyeshadow to enhance his hazel eyes, and a soft pink lipstick that made his lips look fuller without being garish. She'd even taught him how to walk in the low kitten heels she'd selected, sensible footwear that wouldn't have him toppling over during the party. Standing before the mirror in Diana's room, Carlos barely recognized himself. The stranger looking back wasn't the ridiculous caricature of femininity from a few days ago, but a convincingly ordinary woman in her early 30s. Not bad, Diana said, appearing behind him with a simple silver necklace. You actually clean up pretty well as Josephine. Carlos watched her fasten the necklace around his throat. I still hate you for this. No, you don't, Diana said confidently. You're just scared. Of course I'm scared. I'm about to walk into a party full of strangers pretending to be someone I'm not. Diana met his eyes in the mirror. Haven't you been doing that your whole life anyway? The question hit with unexpected force, leaving Carlos momentarily speechless. Before he could formulate a response, Diana was steering him toward the door. "Remember," she instructed, "you're my cousin Josephine from Seattle, visiting for the weekend. You work in finance, you're single, and you're shy around new people, which explains why you won't talk much." "How considerate of you to give me an excuse to be silent," Carlos muttered. "Just stay close to me, smile politely, and try not to walk like you're marching into battle." Diana handed him a small clutch purse. "Your phone and some cash are in there. Emergency exit plan. If things get too overwhelming, text me, red alert, and we'll leave immediately." Carlos blinked, surprised by this concession. "Really?" "Really," Diana confirmed. "This is about teaching you a lesson, not destroying you psychologically." She straightened his necklace. "Ready?" He wasn't, but he nodded anyway. The party was being held at Olivia's downtown loft, a spacious converted industrial space with exposed brick walls and large windows overlooking the city. By the time Carlos and Diana arrived, the gathering was in full swing. About 20 people clustered in conversation groups, drinks in hand, music playing at a volume that required raised voices without preventing conversation. Carlos hung back as Diana greeted her friends, his heart pounding so hard he was certain it must be visible through the cream-colored dress. A thin sheen of sweat formed beneath the wig, and he fought the urge to fidget with it.
"There you are!"
A woman with a pixie cut and glasses approached, throwing her arms around Diana. "I was beginning to think you'd bail on me." "Never," Diana laughed, returning the hug. "Happy birthday, Liv. Sorry we're late. This is my cousin Josephine. The one I mentioned was visiting from Seattle." Olivia turned to Carlos with a warm smile. "Josephine, Diana's told me so much about you. Welcome to Boston." Carlos cleared his throat, conscious of maintaining a higher pitch without sounding cartoonish. "Thank you. Happy birthday." "Your dress is gorgeous," Olivia complimented. "Very summer chic." "Thank you," Carlos repeated, wondering if that response would suffice for the entire evening. "Come on, let me introduce you around." Olivia linked her arm through Carlos's, leading him deeper into the party while Diana followed, an amused smile playing on her lips. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and small talk. Carlos smiled and nodded, offering minimal responses while carefully monitoring his voice and movements. To his surprise, no one gave him a second glance or seemed to suspect he wasn't exactly who Diana claimed. He was just another woman at the party, unremarkable and accepted without question. As the initial terror subsided, Carlos found himself relaxing incrementally. He accepted a glass of white wine, sipping it slowly as he observed the dynamics around him. The conversations he heard were no different from those at any gathering: work complaints, relationship updates, political opinions. But there was something different about how the women interacted with each other compared to the male-dominated spaces he usually inhabited. There was more physical contact, casual touches on arms or shoulders, hugs and greeting, heads bent close together during private exchanges. The laughter seemed freer somehow, less performative. No one appeared to be jockeying for dominance or one-upping each other with achievements. "You doing okay?" Diana appeared at his side, her own wine glass nearly empty. Carlos nodded. "Surprisingly, yes." "See? Not the end of the world." She bumped his shoulder gently with hers. "You make a convincing wallflower." "Thanks, I think." "Actually," Diana said more seriously, "you seem more comfortable than I expected. I was prepared for you to text me red alert within 20 minutes. Carlos considered this. It's strange, but once the initial panic passed, it's been educational. Nobody's looking at me sideways or questioning my presence. I'm just here. That's generally how existing works, Diana said dryly, but her expression was thoughtful. Come on, Olivia's about to open presents. The group gathered around a table laden with gifts. Carlos hung back, watching as Olivia exclaimed over each present with genuine delight. He found himself smiling at her enthusiasm, momentarily forgetting his unusual circumstances.
Josephine, right?
A voice at his elbow made him start. Carlos turned to find a tall woman with dark hair holding 2 plates of cake. Yes, that's me. You looked like you could use some dessert, she said, offering one of the plates. I'm Rachel, Olivia's cousin. Thank you. Carlos accepted the cake, oddly touched by the gesture. First time meeting this crowd? Rachel asked. They can be overwhelming in large doses. Carlos smiled. Is it that obvious? You have that slightly deer-in-headlights look. Rachel's tone was kind rather than mocking. Don't worry, they're good people, just loud. They fell into surprisingly easy conversation. Rachel worked in publishing and had recently moved to Boston from Chicago. She asked about Seattle, and Carlos found himself improvising based on a business trip he'd taken there years ago, relaxing into the role of Josephine more naturally than he'd anticipated. I should probably mingle, Rachel said eventually. But it was nice talking with you. Maybe we'll run into each other again while you're in town. Carlos felt a flutter of panic. I'm heading back tomorrow, actually. That's too bad, Rachel said, sounding genuinely disappointed. Well, if you're ever visiting Diana again, look me up. As Rachel walked away, Carlos caught Diana watching him from across the room, her expression unreadable. When their eyes met, she raised her glass in a small toast. Carlos wasn't sure if it was acknowledgement of his successful deception or something else entirely. The party began winding down around midnight. Carlos's feet ached from the unaccustomed heels, but otherwise, his discomfort had largely faded. He had survived the evening without catastrophe, had even enjoyed parts of it, a revelation he wasn't quite ready to examine. Ready to go? Diana asked, retrieving their coats. Carlos nodded, relieved but also experiencing an unexpected twinge of something like regret. On their way out, he received several warm goodbyes and invitations to visit again soon. Olivia hugged him, thanking him for coming, and Rachel waved from across the room, mouthing, "Nice meeting you." The night air was cool against his face as they stepped outside. Diana hailed a rideshare, and they waited in companionable silence. "So," Diana said finally, "that wasn't so terrible, was it?" Carlos stared at the city lights. "No," he admitted. "It wasn't. You passed with flying colors. No one suspected a thing." "I noticed." Diana studied him. "You actually seemed to be enjoying yourself toward the end." Carlos shrugged, not trusting himself to respond. The truth was, he had enjoyed himself, and that fact disturbed him more than the entire cross-dressing scenario. "Our ride's here," Diana said, as a car pulled up. During the journey home, they said little, each lost in their own thoughts. Back at the apartment, Diana helped Carlos remove the wig and necklace. "Go wash your face and change," she said, her voice gentler than it had been all week.
"I'll make some tea."
20 minutes later, Carlos emerged from the bathroom in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his face scrubbed clean, hair damp from the shower. He felt strangely disoriented, as if stepping back into his male identity was putting on a costume rather than removing one. Diana was waiting in the kitchen with 2 steaming mugs. "Here," she said, sliding one toward him. "Chamomile, good for processing existential crises." Carlos managed a weak smile. "I'm not having an existential crisis." "No?" Diana raised an eyebrow. "You've barely spoken since we left the party, and you've been avoiding eye contact." Carlos wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "I'm just processing." "Processing what, exactly?" He took a deep breath. "The fact that I didn't hate it. Being Josephine, I mean." Diana nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Do you want to talk about that?" "Not really," Carlos admitted. "I don't know what to say. It was supposed to be humiliating, a punishment, but it didn't feel that way." He stared into his tea. "What does that mean about me?" "It doesn't have to mean anything you're not ready for it to mean," Diana said carefully. "But for what it's worth, I've never seen you more relaxed in social situations than you were tonight." Carlos looked up. "You noticed that too?" "It was hard to miss." Diana hesitated. "Look, I need to confess something. This didn't go exactly as I planned." "What do you mean?" Diana sighed. "I was angry when I caught you reading my diary. I wanted to embarrass you, teach you a lesson about privacy and boundaries. But as we were shopping, as I was helping you get ready, I started to see something in you change. You moved differently, spoke differently, and not just because you were trying to pass as female." "How so?" Carlos asked, his throat tight. "You seemed unburdened somehow, like you'd set down a heavy backpack you'd been carrying for years." Diana reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "I've always felt you were holding yourself back, trying to fit into some mold that wasn't quite right. Tonight, I saw glimpses of you without that constraint." Carlos pulled his hand away, overwhelmed. "You're reading too much into one weird night." "Maybe," Diana conceded. "Or maybe I know my brother better than he knows himself." They finished their tea in silence. Before heading to bed, Diana placed her phone on the table between them. "What's this?" Carlos asked. "My phone. With the pictures. Delete them." Carlos stared at her. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Diana confirmed. "This was never about the photos, not really, and you kept your end of the bargain." Carlos picked up the phone, found the incriminating pictures, and erased them one by one. "Thank you," he said quietly, handing the device back. Diana nodded, then hesitated. "One more thing. The cream dress, the wig, the shoes. They're yours if you want them. I bought them for you, not as rentals." She held up a hand before he could respond. "No pressure. They'll be in a box in my closet if you ever decide you want to revisit Josephine. If not, I'll donate them next month." With that, she left him alone in the kitchen, his reflection distorted in the dark window glass. A man outwardly, yet carrying the evening's revelation like a secret glowing ember inside his chest. 3 weeks passed. Carlos moved out of Diana's apartment as planned, returning to his own place across town. They spoke occasionally by phone, carefully avoiding any mention of the party or Josephine. On the surface, life returned to normal. Work, gym, occasional dates that never seemed to develop into anything meaningful. But something had changed irrevocably. Carlos found himself noticing women differently, not with attraction but with a kind of analytical awareness, observing how they dressed, moved, interacted. He caught himself studying his own reflection more frequently, noting the angles of his face, the slenderness of his build. And late at night, when sleep proved elusive, his thoughts returned to that evening at Olivia's party, to the strange comfort he'd found inhabiting Josephine's skin. He tried dating more aggressively, as if to prove something to himself. He went out with 3 different women in 2 weeks, each date more forced than the last. The women were attractive, intelligent, interesting, and completely wrong, though he couldn't articulate why. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, 6 weeks after the party, Carlos found himself driving to Diana's apartment building. He hadn't called ahead, half hoping she wouldn't be home so he could abandon whatever impulse had brought him there. But her car was in its usual spot, and his feet carried him to her door almost against his will. Diana looked surprised when she opened the door. "Carlos? Is everything okay?"
"Is the box still in your closet?"
he asked without preamble. Understanding dawned in her eyes. She stepped back, inviting him in. "Yes, it's still there." Diana retrieved the box without comment and set it on her living room couch. She squeezed his shoulder once, then retreated to the kitchen, giving him privacy as he stared at the cardboard container that held a key to something he was only beginning to understand. With trembling hands, Carlos opened the box. The cream-colored dress lay neatly folded on top, the auburn highlighted wig beside it, the kitten heels nestled in tissue paper. Beneath these were items he hadn't expected: a small makeup kit, a pair of sheer tights, simple silver earrings. Diana reappeared with 2 cups of coffee. "I added a few essentials," she explained, settling into an armchair across from him. "Just in case." Carlos looked up, his eyes wet. "I don't know what I'm doing, Di." "No one ever does," she said gently. "But I'll help you figure it out, whatever it turns out to be." 2 years later, Josephine stood in front of a different mirror, in a different apartment. Her auburn hair, grown out now past her shoulders with the same subtle highlights she'd first worn as a wig, was pulled back in a loose ponytail. The cream-colored dress was long gone, replaced by a wardrobe that reflected her evolved style, professional but feminine, comfortable yet polished. The journey had not been easy. There had been therapy sessions, difficult conversations with friends and colleagues, periods of doubt and identity questioning. There had been the slow process of hormone therapy, voice training, legal name changes. There had been losses, friends who drifted away, a parent who struggled to understand, a job that suddenly felt less welcoming. But there had been gains too, a newfound authenticity that permeated every aspect of her life. A circle of supportive friends, many from Diana's network, who remembered meeting Josephine at Olivia's birthday party and welcomed her permanent presence in their lives. A new position at a more progressive firm that valued her financial expertise, regardless of her gender presentation. The doorbell rang, pulling Josephine from her reflection. She straightened her green blouse, checking once more that her makeup was intact before going to answer. Diana stood on the threshold, a bottle of champagne in one hand and a small gift bag in the other. "Happy transition anniversary," she said, stepping forward to embrace her sister. 2 years since you came to retrieve that box. How does it feel?" "Surreal sometimes," Josephine admitted, accepting the bottle. "But right. It feels right." They moved to the kitchen, where Josephine opened the champagne and poured 2 glasses. Diana settled at the counter, watching her sister move comfortably through her space. Remember how terrified you were that night at Olivia's party? Diana asked, smiling at the memory. How could I forget? I was certain someone would point and scream, "Imposter!" Josephine laughed. Instead, Rachel gave me cake and asked for my number. Speaking of Rachel, Diana said casually, Olivia mentioned she's single again. Josephine rolled her eyes. Still trying to play matchmaker after all this time? Can you blame me? I have excellent taste. I practically created you. You gave me a push, Josephine corrected. I did the hard work myself. Diana raised her glass. To hard work, then, and to finding yourself, even in the unlikeliest circumstances. Josephine clinked her glass against her sister's. And to siblings who know us better than we know ourselves, even when they're being terrible blackmailers. I prefer catalyst for transformative self-discovery, Diana quipped. That's a fancy way of saying nosy big sister. They laughed together, the easy camaraderie of siblings who had navigated extraordinary change without losing their fundamental connection. Later, as they sat on Josephine's balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Diana grew contemplative. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Any of it? Josephine considered the question seriously. I regret the pain my journey caused others. I regret the years I spent not understanding why I felt so disconnected from myself. She sipped her champagne. But I don't regret becoming who I am, even if the catalyst was you catching me reading your diary and exacting a particularly creative revenge. Diana smiled. What can I say? I've always had a flair for the dramatic. That you have. Josephine reached over to squeeze her sister's hand. Thank you, not just for the push, but for standing by me through everything that came after. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have, Diana said firmly. You'd have found your way eventually. I just expedited the process. Still, Josephine persisted. Thank you. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the city lights beginning to twinkle below them. Josephine thought about the strange, winding path that had led her here, from a boundary violation to an act of revenge to a profound discovery of self. From Carlos to Josephine, from confusion to clarity. It hadn't been the journey she would have chosen, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. And for that, despite everything, she was genuinely grateful.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!